Pilot questioned black woman her English. She's a undiplomat flying to a global conference. They say the most powerful stories begin with a single moment that lights a fuse, and that fuse can lead to an explosion no one sees coming. In today's drama, we find a brilliant black woman, Dr. Amani Wright, casually waiting at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, oblivious to the storm that's about to break. She's a United Nations diplomat, bound for a life-changing conference in Geneva, Switzerland, when a pilot questions her English, her credentials, and her very worth. Little does he know she's carrying the weight of global change on her shoulders. This is a story of prejudice, resilience, and hard-earned karma. Dr. Amani Wright rose early that morning, her thoughts whirling with excitement and a trace of dread. As one of the youngest African-American diplomats at the United Nations, she had spent the last 8 months preparing policy papers on global sustainability for the upcoming summit in Geneva, a conference personally endorsed by Under-Secretary General Antonio Guterres. She'd burned the midnight oil innumerable times, drafting comprehensive solutions to climate-induced displacement, resource allocation, and international cooperation. And now, the day was here. She would fly from Atlanta to New York to connect with the rest of the delegation, then onward to Geneva. Her taxi dropped her off at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport a little before sunrise, the city's skyline still yawning behind her. The air smelled of coffee and possibilities. The terminal bustled with energy, families reuniting, couples embracing, and solitary travelers wearing headphones, lost in their own worlds. Amani breathed in the moment. This was not her first time flying out for critical negotiations, but it was the first time she felt a real sense of history. The Global Summit on Sustainable Futures promised to be groundbreaking, bringing together world leaders, scholars, activists, and most importantly, young voices from around the globe. Clad in a simple navy blue suit, with a subtle unlapel pin, Amani blended comfort with quiet authority. She was tall, poised, and carried herself with the self-assured grace of someone who had overcome her fair share of obstacles. Born and raised in Atlanta, she was no stranger to the city's nuances. She had grown up attending rallies and protests, absorbing the legacy of the civil rights movement. Her father was a retired professor of sociology, her mother a local activist who championed educational reforms. Through them, Amani learned how to stand firm in a world that sometimes questioned her identity, her ability, or her right to speak. At the airline counter, a friendly ticketing agent scanned her passport. "Everything looks in order, Dr. Wright. Your flight to New York is on time. You'll have about a 2-hour layover before the international leg. Are you checking any luggage?" She smiled back, her voice carrying an undercurrent of anticipation. "Just this one suitcase." She placed a medium-sized roller bag on the scale. A carry-on holding her laptop and essential documents rested on her shoulder. "Perfect," the agent said, printing out a boarding pass. "You're all set. Enjoy your trip." Amani thanked her, took a few steps, and then paused for a breath. She felt the sweet blend of relief and expectancy. She was on schedule. The coffee shop to her left beckoned with its aroma, so she made her way there to grab a quick latte. The line moved quickly, but as she waited, she overheard bits of conversation from people behind her, snippets about flight delays, last-minute changes, and a possible pilot shortage. She paid it no mind at first. Such rumors were common. Still, something about the nervous chatter made her shoulders tense. She shook it off. Latte in hand, she found a seat near the large windows overlooking the runway. Airplanes nosed along the tarmac, ground crews busily scurrying. She wanted to relish this quiet moment before heading through security. She flicked on her phone, scanning emails for last-minute updates from the UN. The main talking points for the Geneva summit had been circulated, along with an updated schedule. Her name was on the official roster of speakers slated to address the significance of global partnerships for climate resilience. She exhaled a small, proud sigh. Time to move. She gathered her carry-on and walked towards security. No lines of serious length this early, so she breezed through. The security guard, a jovial older man, even cracked a joke about her pin. "Yeah, heading off to save the world," Armani grinned. "Trying my best. Wish me luck." He winked. "We're all rooting for you." Stepping beyond security into the wide concourse, Armani glanced at the overhead signs. Gate B16. She had some time before boarding, so she ambled through the shops, eventually meandering to her gate. She found a seat at a charging station and settled down to revise her remarks for the opening day of the summit. Immersed in her writing, she barely noticed the time until she heard the boarding announcement. That's when the first faint jolt of tension arrived. In front of the gate podium stood the pilot, tall, with crisp epaulettes and an expression that was unreadable behind stiff professionalism. He was speaking with a flight attendant and occasionally glanced at the passengers around him. When his gaze landed on Armani, the look lingered just a moment too long. She offered a polite smile. He did not return it. Instead, he gave a slight nod, one that felt more like a dismissal than a greeting, and turned away. Probably nothing, Armani thought. She filed away the uncomfortable moment, attributing it to the stress of the job. Pilots had 1,000 details to handle. She stood when her zone was called, quietly lining up. Minutes later, she entered the aircraft, found her seat in business class, and stowed her carry-on overhead. The seat next to her was vacant for the moment. She buckled in, took a breath, and refocused on her notepad. The flight crew's voices droned over the intercom with the usual announcements: flight time, cruising altitude, in-flight service. Then something unusual happened. Instead of the typical greeting from the pilot, "Hello folks, this is your captain speaking," there was silence. Some of the passengers exchanged puzzled looks. Armani frowned slightly. Eventually, the plane began to taxi toward the runway. The engines hummed, the wings adjusting for takeoff. Moments before liftoff, the pilot's voice crackled through the speakers. "This is Captain Robert McAllister. Flight time to New York is approximately 2 hours and 3 minutes. We expect a smooth journey. Flight attendants, please prepare for takeoff." Armani felt her stomach drop a little from the abrupt acceleration. She leaned back in her seat. The plane roared down the runway, pressed her into the cushion, then lifted skyward. She forced herself to think about the global conference, the talk she would give, the people she'd network with. It was exhilarating just imagining it. She had no inkling that the real confrontation was waiting for her on the ground, hours away, overshadowed by an ordinary flight. Little did she know that this pilot, Captain McAllister, would be the one to challenge more than just her English. He would soon challenge the essence of who she was and what she represented, and in doing so, he'd stumble into a tangle of controversy that would upend not just her day, but his own life. The flight landed smoothly at John F. Kennedy International Airport. Armani felt a sense of relief wash over her. The first leg had been uneventful, aside from her persistent feeling that Captain McAllister had scrutinized her more than usual during the short flight. She couldn't say he'd done or said anything overtly off, but he had walked through the cabin once, glancing at passengers, and his stare had lingered on her again. She brushed it aside. She had more pressing matters to focus on. Once off the plane, Armani quickly checked the board for her connecting flight to Geneva. She was pleased to see it was on schedule. She'd be flying out on a large intercontinental aircraft, one known for carrying politicians, diplomats, and all sorts of distinguished travelers from New York to Europe. She wound her way through the labyrinth of JFK to the international terminal, scanning overhead signs. The concourse thrummed with energy. A swirl of languages filled the air, from Mandarin to French to Swahili. She adored that about airports. Where else could you find such a diverse slice of humanity? But as she approached her gate, an odd ripple spread through the crowd. People standing near Gate 23 were talking in hushed tones and eyeing the uniformed crew members. She noticed a cluster of airport staff, including a gate agent in deep conversation with, of all people, Captain Robert McAllister. Her heart skipped. Why was he here? He had just flown the regional route from Atlanta to New York. Typically, commercial airline pilots wouldn't handle an international flight without at least some rest or a change of schedule. Curiosity prickled. She heard fragments of conversation as she neared the gate. Short notice, substitution, pilot scheduling, said one agent. Can't believe this switch, said another. It became apparent that Captain McAllister would be the pilot for her flight to Geneva as well. The gate agent tried to calm an irate passenger who was complaining about a 1-hour delay. Something about a pilot shortage had forced a last-minute scheduling change. Amani's chest tightened. She was all for coincidences, but this felt charged. She approached the lounge area, scanning for the rest of the undelegation. Her colleague, Miriam Wambui from Kenya, spotted her and waved. Miriam was equally tall, with an elegant presence. She greeted Amani with a bright smile and a warm hug. Amani, finally, I heard rumors there might be a pilot issue, but I guess it's sorted. She motioned toward the uniformed crew. At least we're still on track to reach Geneva in time. Amani allowed herself a small laugh. Yes, though it's a bit strange. The same pilot from my previous flight is now captaining this one. Miriam's eyebrows shot up. That is odd. Maybe he's filling in? That must be it, Amani nodded, deciding to share her slight discomfort. He gave me this weird vibe on the flight from Atlanta. Might be nothing, but I noticed it. Miriam pursed her lips. Keep your guard up, but let's not jump to conclusions. Could be stress. The two settled into a row of seats near the windows, waiting for the new boarding time. They discussed their joint panel in Geneva, a talk about equitable resource distribution in developing nations. The discussion eased some of Amani's tension. She loved brainstorming with Miriam. Their synergy was the reason the UN had them working in tandem, two brilliant minds from different corners of the world, forging alliances. An announcement chimed. The gate agent's voice spilled through the speaker. Attention, passengers of flight UA 958 to Geneva. We apologize for the delay. Boarding will commence shortly with priority passengers and first class. Business class and any passengers needing assistance will follow. Thank you for your patience. Amani glanced at her business class boarding pass. She wouldn't board first, but she'd be among the early groups. Miriam was in premium economy, so they'd be separated for the flight. They rose with the rest of the throng, stepping into the lines forming around the gate. Amani noticed that Captain McAllister stood near the entrance to the jet bridge, speaking to a senior flight attendant. His eyes flickered over the crowd. She could almost feel his gaze latch onto her. Her heart hammered, but she steadied herself. When her turn arrived, the gate agent politely scanned her pass and passport. Thank you, Dr. Wright. Enjoy your flight. The agent then turned to greet the next passenger. Amani proceeded down the jet bridge, inhaling the metallic tang of airplane corridors. Just before stepping on board, she heard footsteps behind her, heavy, hurried. She glanced over her shoulder. Captain McAllister was right there, lips pressed into a thin line. He said nothing, simply continued past her. Something in his eyes made her feel as though she'd done something wrong, though she couldn't imagine what. Inside the plane, she found her seat. This larger aircraft had a more spacious business-class cabin with lie-flat seats. She tucked away her carry-on and sank into the plush seat. The tension in her shoulders refused to dissipate. The seat across the aisle from her was occupied by an older man reading a German newspaper. A flight attendant offered him champagne. She took water for herself, wanting to stay sharp. Minutes passed. The cabin started to fill. Miriam passed by on her way to the rear cabins, pausing briefly to give Amani a smile and a wave before finding her seat. Amani resumed scanning through documents on her tablet, half listening to the swirl of commotion around her. Then out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Captain McAllister step into the business class cabin. Typically, a pilot might greet the cabin briefly or have a quick word with a flight attendant. But he lingered again. His eyes roamed the seats until they locked on Amani. "Is everything all right, Captain?" the flight attendant asked him, glancing between him and the passengers. For a split second, Amani thought he might approach her directly. Instead, he gave a curt nod to the flight attendant. "Yes, fine," he muttered, "just double-checking passenger count." Then he turned on his heel and left. Amani's pulse pounded. She felt singled out, yet she hadn't exchanged a single word with the man. She bit her lip, wondering if she should mention it to the flight attendant, but decided to wait. Maybe, just maybe, he was simply verifying something routine. Forcing herself to calm down, she scrolled through her Geneva schedule. Day 1 would start with an opening ceremony, day 2 with breakout sessions. She told herself that focusing on her diplomatic duties was more important than worrying about a pilot's odd behavior. Still, in the back of her mind, a question loomed. Why did he keep staring? Why was his expression so cold, almost accusatory? 40 minutes later, the plane taxied away from the gate and lined up on the runway. The hum of the engines grew into a roar as the aircraft surged forward, pressing Amani back against her seat. She whispered a small prayer under her breath, something she often did during takeoff. In spite of her frequent travels, she never lost that fleeting spike of anxiety whenever a plane's wheels left the ground. As the plane climbed, the seatbelt sign remained on a bit longer than usual due to mild turbulence. Once the aircraft leveled off at cruising altitude, the sign dinged off. Passengers began to recline their seats, rummage in overhead bins, and set up laptops or settle in for a long flight's rest. Amani took a deep breath. She looked forward to diving into some reading. She had a few key policy briefs from UNESCO that needed review before the next morning's session, yet she found herself unsettled, unable to focus. The pilot's repeated stares weighed on her, and she felt foolish for allowing it to distract her. She hated feeling so on edge, especially when representing the UN. Diplomacy demanded composure. She was just about to slip on noise-cancelling headphones when a soft voice startled her. "MAAM." She looked up to see a flight attendant, a polite smile on her face. "The captain would like to speak with you." Her stomach lurched. "The captain?" "Yes, ma'am," the flight attendant repeated gently. "He's requested that you come to the cockpit at your earliest convenience." Confusion and unease churned. It was highly unusual for a pilot to request a passenger to come to the cockpit, particularly on an international flight. Amani unbuckled and stood, following the attendant through the aisle. The attendants parted a curtain near the galley, revealing the cockpit door. The flight attendant pressed a button. A moment later, the door opened from within. Captain McAllister looked out, his face as impassive as marble. "Come in," he said stiffly. She stepped into the cockpit, heart hammering. She glanced around at the co-pilot and the myriad of controls and blinking lights. The co-pilot, a younger woman with her hair in a tight bun, offered a cordial nod, but said nothing. There was a tension in the air, as if the oxygen had thinned out. Captain McAllister shut the door behind Amani and gestured for her to stand near the back of the cramped space. "I need to verify something," he said in a clipped tone. "Your language proficiency." Amani blinked. "Excuse me." He cleared his throat, squaring his shoulders. "I overheard you speaking with the flight attendant, earlier in French, I believe, or maybe another language. I just want to make sure you can understand English properly. Aviation safety depends on clear communication. We can't have passengers misunderstanding instructions in an emergency." At first, she was too stunned to respond. Then her shock ignited into a measured outrage. "Captain, I'm an American citizen, born and raised in Atlanta, and I'm more than proficient in English." Her voice was level, but the tension radiated beneath. He pursed his lips. "You have a slight accent." Amani's eyes narrowed. I may speak with a certain regional accent or adopt certain speech rhythms from living abroad, but I assure you it does not impede my comprehension of English. Also, you do realize this question is highly irregular and borderline discriminatory. Are you specifically questioning my English skills because you overheard me speak another language or because of my skin color? A muscle in his jaw twitched. I'm questioning your communication skills because I have the authority and the responsibility to ensure passenger safety. If you don't like it, take it up with the airline. The co-pilot gave Captain McAllister a sidelong look, her brow creased in discomfort. She seemed about to interject, then thought better of it, focusing on the instrument panel. Amani took a steadying breath. Let me be clear. I'm Dr. Amani Wright, a diplomat with the United Nations. I have traveled all over the world in service of international cooperation. No pilot, none has ever questioned my ability to comprehend English. You are, in effect, harassing a passenger under the guise of safety. Captain McAllister's stare was granite. I just want to ensure we don't have misunderstandings. Then let's make it perfectly clear, Amani said, her voice quiet but firm. I have no intention of interfering with the safety instructions. I will comply with all directions. I've never failed to do so on any flight. If there's nothing else, I'd like to return to my seat. A tense silence. The hum of the plane's engines underscored the moment, like a subdued roar of indignation. Finally, he grunted. Fine. She turned to the cockpit door. Before leaving, she glanced at the co-pilot, giving her a polite nod. The co-pilot looked away, seemingly embarrassed. Amani stepped back into the galley, heart thumping so loudly she was sure the flight attendant could hear it. She marched down the aisle, tears of anger threatening to surface. But she refused to let them fall. Back in her seat, she fastened her seatbelt again, forcing her mind to quell the swirl of emotions. She needed to calm down, maybe talk to a flight attendant about filing a complaint, but her phone was in airplane mode. She had no direct line of contact with the outside world until landing. The best she could do was hold on to her dignity. Yet the entire incident had planted a seed of conflict that would soon grow beyond a single question of language proficiency. Because while Captain McAllister had apparently singled her out for reasons she couldn't quite fathom, racism, xenophobia, or personal bias, this confrontation was going to cast a long shadow. Little did either of them know, the humiliating exchange in that cockpit would set off a cascade of events that would shake the foundation of this flight, and eventually the entire airline. For the next few hours, Amani tried to focus on her work. She retrieved a stack of policy briefs from her carry-on, determined to review them for the conference. Pages of dense text on sustainable water usage, environmental displacement, and international legislation on greenhouse gas emissions should have occupied her full attention. But every now and then, her thoughts looped back to the cockpit incident, fueling a smoldering anger. Dinner service came. The flight attendants glided through the aisles, offering trays of surprisingly decent airplane cuisine, roast chicken or pasta, salad, and a small dessert. Amani picked at her meal without enthusiasm. She sipped the water, conscious of staying hydrated on a transatlantic flight. Around her, other passengers dozed, listened to music, or chatted quietly. Night enveloped the cabin. The plane soared high above the Atlantic Ocean. Some overhead lights dimmed, creating a hushed, almost dreamlike atmosphere. Amani tried to settle into a half-reclined position, hoping to snatch some sleep, but rest felt impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, a wave of resentment rose in her chest. She turned on the in-flight entertainment, flipping through movie titles before settling on a nature documentary. Something soothing, she thought. Let the calls of migrating birds and footage of ice floes calm her nerves. A few rows ahead, a commotion broke out. A man in a business suit was standing, raising his voice at a flight attendant. Something about a lost bag or a missing piece of carry-on. Amani couldn't quite hear, but the man's frustration was palpable. The attendant tried to pacify him, speaking in hushed tones. A moment later, the man stormed toward the galley. Another passenger, a middle-aged woman, followed him, attempting to reason with him. The tension in the air spiked. Suddenly, the seatbelt sign dinged on. The plane lurched. Turbulence. A ripple of anxiety coursed through the cabin. The flight attendants urged passengers to sit down. The lights flickered once. A shudder ran through the fuselage. A crackling voice emerged from the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're encountering some rough air. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. We should be through this in a few minutes. Thank you." It was Captain McAllister, his tone calm and methodical. Amani felt the plane dip slightly, then jolt upward. She clutched the armrests, heart quickening. She'd experienced turbulence before, but the timing felt ominous, as though the atmosphere itself were disturbed by the conflict brewing inside the aircraft. She forced herself to breathe in through her nose, out through her mouth, reminding herself that modern planes are engineered to withstand these forces. Dark clouds roiled outside the windows, occasionally illuminated by distant flashes of lightning. Rain battered the fuselage, audible even through the thick walls. The seatbelt sign remained on, and for what felt like ages, the plane rocked and rumbled. The flight attendants, strapped into their jump seats, wore expressions of tension. During one particularly rough jolt, the overhead compartment above Amani rattled. Her carry-on was secure, but the door threatened to pop open. She pressed the call button to alert the attendant. The seatbelt sign still glowed, so no one could stand. Eventually, the flight attendant closest to her, a tall man named Jose, nodded in understanding. He spoke into his own intercom system, and a second attendant emerged from the galley, bracing herself as she made her way toward the overhead bin. With expert timing, she unlatched and relatched it securely, then hurried back to the galley. After nearly 30 minutes of teeth-rattling turbulence, the plane seemed to break free of the storm cell. The ride smoothed, the seatbelt sign blinked off, people exhaled in collective relief, a few even clapped. The flight attendants resumed their rounds, checking on each passenger. Amani gave Jose a grateful smile for his assistance. He offered a half bow in return. She reached for a glass of water, hands still trembling slightly. Stress upon stress. She considered whether to mention her earlier cockpit incident to Jose, but he looked so busy, and she wasn't sure what good it would do mid-flight. Deciding to wait until landing, she turned back to her documentary. The ice floes drifted serenely across the screen, a surreal contrast to the roiling tension that had possessed the cabin mere minutes ago. Her eyelids grew heavy. Eventually, the emotional exhaustion overcame her, and she drifted into a fitful sleep, lulled by the quiet hum of the engines and the receding turbulence. A bright sliver of dawn peeked through the windows as flight UA 958 neared the European coast. Cabin lights gradually brightened, and flight attendants began the breakfast service, small trays of croissants, fruit, and yogurt. Amani stirred awake, blinking in confusion, until she remembered she was on a flight bound for Geneva. She felt a dull ache in her neck from the uncomfortable sleep. While she nibbled on her croissant, she skimmed through the remainder of her policy documents. The storm inside her had settled overnight, replaced with a cold resolve. She planned to lodge an official complaint against Captain McAllister the moment she landed. Discrimination wasn't new to her, but she refused to let it slide. A flight attendant's voice rang out. "We'll begin our descent shortly. Please stow your carry-on items, bring your seatbacks forward, and ensure your seatbelts are fastened." The bustle of activity accompanied that announcement. The plane angled downward, beginning a slow approach to Geneva. The city's famous lakes sparkled below, hemmed by majestic mountains. At around 8:15 local time, the wheels touched the runway. A slight bounce, then a smooth brake. Relief flooded the cabin. Armani gathered her belongings and joined the queue to deplane. She glimpsed Captain McAllister near the cockpit door, presumably intending to say goodbye to the passengers as they disembarked, a common courtesy. Her heart quickened. Sure enough, as she reached the threshold, he stood there, arms folded. "Thank you for flying with us," he said to the passenger in front of her in a neutral tone. Then it was Armani's turn. She held his gaze, waiting to see if he'd offer the same polite farewell. Instead, he said, barely audible, "Next time, speak English in front of the crew. We don't want confusion." Armani's eyes blazed. She mustered all her diplomatic composure. "I'll be speaking to your superiors." She brushed past him, trembling with fury. A couple of flight attendants overheard the exchange, their faces a mixture of shock and discomfort. But none spoke up. Once in the terminal, she hurried through immigration, flashing her diplomatic passport. Miriam was waiting for her by the luggage carousel, wearing a concerned expression. "You look like you're about to explode," Miriam said gently. "What happened?" Armani relayed the entire ordeal. Miriam's jaw set in righteous anger. "This is unacceptable. I'll support you in any complaint you file." He crossed the line. They retrieved their bags and moved into the arrivals hall, where a driver holding a placard with their names waited. On the ride from the airport to their hotel, Armani made calls to the airline's customer service first, who directed her to an online form. "This is a serious complaint," she told the agent, summarizing the situation. The agent's scripted empathy responses irritated her, but she pressed forward, lodging her claim. Next, she called her direct superior at the Under-Secretary Darius Lindstrom, who was already in Geneva. After hearing her story, Lindstrom was outraged. "This is more than a small-time prejudice," he said. "This is a challenge to your professional capacity. We need to ensure it doesn't overshadow your crucial work here. But we won't let it slide either." Armani appreciated his support. She ended the call with the vow that she would focus on the conference first, but follow up on the complaint as soon as she had a spare moment. She thanked him for his concern, trying to bury the frustration that gnawed at her. They arrived at their hotel, an elegant building overlooking Lake Geneva. The lobby was busy, delegates from around the world checking in. She and Miriam each received their room keys. Armani's schedule was tight. She had just enough time to freshen up and catch a brief rest before heading to the conference venue for a preliminary meeting. She tried to push the memory of Captain McAllister's sneer from her mind, focusing on the reason she'd come here, to bring about positive global change. Yet, in the back of her mind, she feared the consequences of going head-to-head with a pilot. Stories of people who'd complained about airline staff sometimes got lost in bureaucratic black holes. But she also knew she wasn't just a random passenger. She had the backing of the a role that demanded respect and conferred certain protections. Perhaps that would make the airline take this seriously. What Armani didn't know was that back at JFK, a formal incident report was already being filed by one of the flight attendants who had overheard the pilot's remarks. That individual, deeply troubled, had typed up a full account of the incident to pass on to airline management. The seeds of retribution were quietly being sown. Captain McAllister's unprofessional behavior was not going to remain hidden behind the cockpit door. Geneva's Palais des Nations stood resplendent under the bright morning sun. Flags from every member state fluttered along the entrance, a kaleidoscope of national banners. Armani walked through the security checkpoints, her official badge granting her swift passage. The main hall buzzed with activity, political leaders, experts, journalists, all converging to debate and collaborate on sustainable futures. She felt a surge of pride stepping into the main assembly room. Rows of desks were arranged in semicircles around a central podium, microphones and headsets neatly placed. She found her seat among fellow unrepresentatives, noticing the swirl of languages popping through earpieces. The day's sessions would open with welcoming remarks from the Secretary-General, followed by keynotes from climate experts. Amani's phone vibrated. She glanced down at a text from Miriam. "Break a leg on your panel. Let's grab lunch after." She smiled faintly, glancing across the room to see if she could spot her friend. It was too crowded, so she typed a quick reply, promising to meet her in the atrium after the session. The opening remarks began. Applause erupted when Secretary-General Antonio Guterres took the stage. His speech was stirring, imploring nations to recognize the urgency of the climate crisis, to act with unity and resolve. Amani felt goosebumps. This was why she was here. Moments like these reminded her of the gravitas of her work. When it was her turn to speak on a specialized panel later in the morning, she rose, smoothed her skirt, and walked toward the front. Seated alongside her were three other experts, including Miriam. The panel's topic, Innovative Partnerships for a Climate-Resilient Future. The moderator introduced them, reading aloud their credentials. A hush settled as Amani began her portion. "Excellencies, distinguished colleagues and fellow global citizens," she started, voice steady. "We are gathered here not to trade platitudes, but to forge real partnerships. Partnerships that transcend borders, ideologies, and historical grievances. Because if one region is swallowed by rising seas or ravaged by desertification, the ripple effects will be felt across the planet." As she spoke, her composure and eloquence shone. She cited research, personal anecdotes from field visits in Africa and Southeast Asia, and the complexities of creating synergy between governments, NGOs, and grassroots movements. She was no stranger to public speaking, and her sincerity resonated with the audience. Occasionally, she glimpsed the nods of approval from ambassadors and leading scientists in the crowd. The adrenaline rushed through her, fueling her confidence. No one here questioned her English proficiency. In fact, she spoke like someone born to articulate ideas for an international audience. All the same, a memory flickered. Captain McAllister's sneer, his suggestion that she might not understand instructions. The very idea seemed ludicrous in light of the speech she was delivering to world leaders. After the panel concluded, the applause was hearty. Delegates approached her with questions, requesting clarifications or offering contacts. She distributed business cards, accepted some in return. One official from the European Commission expressed admiration for her thorough data. A representative from a major philanthropic foundation hinted at possible funding for a project Amani was championing. Miriam joined her after a while, beaming. "That was brilliant, Amani." "You were in your element, thank you." Amani's smile was genuine. That felt incredibly affirming. They headed to the atrium for lunch, where buffet tables were laid out with international cuisine. As they filled their plates, Miriam leaned in. "Any news about your complaint?" Amani shook her head, taking a sip of water. "Nothing yet, but it's only been a few hours. I don't expect an immediate response. I'll follow up with the airline tomorrow if I haven't heard anything." They found a small table near a tall window overlooking manicured gardens. As they ate, Miriam described a new initiative from the Kenyan government to promote solar farms. Amani listened attentively, occasionally offering suggestions. They made a dynamic duo. Halfway through the meal, Amani's phone chimed with an email notification. She opened it, expecting a follow-up from the conference staff. Instead, her eyebrows shot up. It was from the airline's compliance department, stating that her complaint had been escalated to higher management. They requested a written statement detailing the incident, including any witnesses. She quickly typed a brief response, offering to provide a full account once she was back at her hotel, where she could type on her laptop. She also mentioned the possibility of flight attendants who overheard the cockpit exchange. Miriam squeezed her arm in encouragement. "Good," she said simply. "Don't let him get away with this." That afternoon, the conference continued with breakout sessions. Amani attended seminars on climate refugees and sustainable agriculture. Despite her best efforts, a portion of her mind remained locked on the pilot issue. She hated that it lurked like a dark cloud, overshadowing her otherwise triumphant moments here. By evening, she returned to her hotel room, exhausted but satisfied with the day's progress. She changed into comfortable clothing, opened her laptop, and spent the next hour drafting a thorough statement. She recounted every detail, from Captain McAllister's stares on the flight from Atlanta to his confrontation in the cockpit and his parting remark in Geneva. She requested the airline review any relevant security footage, passenger testimonies, and flight attendant accounts. After hitting send, she let out a long exhale. Now it was in their hands. She hoped the process would be swift and just. Yet, a cynic's voice in her head whispered that large institutions sometimes prioritized their own over the complaints of a single passenger, even an undiplomat. She checked the time, nearly 9 p.m. local. She should get some rest. The conference resumed at 8 a.m. sharp. As she prepared for bed, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. "Better watch who you mess with." Some things are best left alone. Her blood ran cold. She stared at the message. Who would have sent this? Could it be Captain McAllister or someone else connected to him? A swirl of fear and anger stormed inside her. She typed back, "Who is this?" But no response came. She tried calling the number. It rang once, then cut off. Anxiety clenched her heart. Sleep would be hard to come by tonight. She double-checked her hotel room's door lock. Then she sent a message to Miriam, letting her know about the disturbing text. Miriam instantly replied, urging her to contact security. Amani decided to show it to the conference's security detail first thing in the morning, then escalate if needed. Lying in bed, she stared at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the air conditioner. She told herself that bullies often tried intimidation tactics. She was stronger than that. But the threat felt real and unsettling. The lights of Geneva twinkled outside her window, a vibrant city bustling with diplomacy and possibility. Yet, here she was, grappling with the shadows that threatened to overshadow her vital work. Morning arrived too soon. A bleary-eyed Amani managed to rally herself, dressed professionally, and headed to the Palais for day 2 of the conference. She planned to speak with security about the message, but the day's events forced her to juggle priorities. An urgent meeting had been scheduled with several high-level diplomats to discuss a last minute policy revision. She couldn't afford to miss it. Between sessions, she briefly caught up with the unsecurity liaison, showing him the threatening text. He promised to investigate, requesting that she forward him the details. It wasn't uncommon for high-profile individuals to receive random harassment, but he assured her they would treat it seriously. The liaison also advised her to remain vigilant. During a coffee break, Amani's phone vibrated again. This time it was a call from the airline's compliance officer, a woman named Linda Liu. Amani stepped away from the crowded corridor, pressing the phone to her ear. "Hello, Dr. Wright. Thank you for taking my call. We've received your statement. We've also gathered preliminary testimonies from one of the flight attendants who overheard Captain McAllister's remarks. We consider these allegations very serious." Amani felt a cautious surge of relief. "I appreciate that. Is there anything else you need from me?" Linda hesitated. "We'd like to schedule a formal interview, perhaps via video conference, at your earliest convenience. We're assembling an internal committee to look into potential breaches of our non-discrimination policy." "Of course," Amani said. "I'm currently in Geneva for the Summit. My schedule is tight, but I can make time in the evening or early morning local time." "Understood. We'll coordinate with you on the time difference." In the meantime, if you recall any further details or if you have any additional evidence, please let us know. Armani thanked her, ended the call, and leaned against the wall, exhaling. At least the airline seemed to be taking it seriously. She rejoined the main hall, slipping into her seat just as the session resumed. Throughout the day, she remained laser-focused on the conference. Yet, she couldn't completely silence the nagging tension. She delivered another compelling speech during a panel on green infrastructure, fielding questions from top economists and environmental scientists. Her intellect shone, her poise unwavering. By the time the applause ended, she felt a surge of validation. Yes, she belonged here, shaping global policies. After the session wrapped, she ducked out to check her phone. Another message from the unknown number: "Don't ruin a good man's career. Retract your complaint." A chill raced up her spine. She forwarded it to the security liaison immediately. Then she typed back a single response: "Stop harassing me." No answer came. She informed Miriam, who cursed under her breath. "This is unacceptable. We need to escalate this." They parted ways for separate discussions. Later, as evening approached, Armani and Miriam returned to the hotel. Armani had an 8 p.m. video call scheduled with Linda Liu and the airline's committee. She set up her laptop on the desk, meticulously arranging her notes. When the call connected, she saw 4 faces on the screen: Linda, 2 other individuals who introduced themselves as part of the airline's legal counsel, and a representative from the airline's pilot union. The union representative, a middle-aged man named Christopher Hall, was the first to speak. "Dr. Wright, let me say we take allegations of discriminatory behavior very seriously. Our pilot workforce is held to high ethical standards. We want to understand your perspective." Armani recounted the incident again, detailing every nuance she could remember. Linda confirmed that a flight attendant supported parts of her story, specifically the pilot's remark about speaking English in front of the crew. When she finished, Christopher Hall nodded slowly. "Captain McAllister has been placed on administrative leave during this investigation," he said. "He asserts he was simply trying to ensure passenger safety by confirming language comprehension." Armani's jaw tightened. "That was clearly not the case. I've traveled extensively. No one has ever demanded a private cockpit meeting to question my English. I believe it was racially motivated." The legal counsel chimed in with a measured tone. "We have zero tolerance for racial discrimination. We will be reviewing cockpit voice recordings, though personal conversations may not be fully captured. We also have statements from other crew members about his demeanor and any remarks they might have overheard." Armani felt a glimmer of hope. "Thank you. I expect a thorough and impartial review." Once the call ended, she collapsed onto her bed, drained. Miriam knocked on her door, concern etched on her features. Armani let her in and relayed the conversation. "I don't know what's going to happen," Armani sighed, "but at least they're investigating. They'll have to act if the evidence is clear," Miriam said firmly. "They can't risk a scandal." "Not with you being a undiplomat," Armani nodded. She appreciated Miriam's unwavering support. Yet, the threatening texts hovered in the back of her mind. This was no longer just a matter of professional conduct. It felt personal, dangerous even. She wondered who was behind those messages and what lengths they might go to protect Captain McAllister or keep her quiet. A few days passed in a whirlwind of conference sessions, diplomatic meetings, and corridor negotiations. The event proved to be a resounding success for Armani's initiatives. She secured endorsements from key nations for a pilot program focusing on climate-smart infrastructure in developing countries. Media outlets picked up on her eloquence, quoting her in articles. She became something of a rising star in the conference coverage. Yet, behind the scenes, the tension with the airline investigation simmered. Linda Liu sent regular updates. They interviewed more flight attendants, scoured internal flight logs, and attempted to retrieve any relevant voice recordings. The pilot union's representative maintained a neutral stance publicly, but Amani sensed they were trying to mitigate damage to Captain McAllister's reputation. Meanwhile, the threatening messages continued, each more aggressive than the last. "Enough, or you'll regret it. We know where you are." Amani forwarded them all to Unsecurity, who escalated the matter to Swiss authorities. Police in Geneva traced the number, only to discover it was registered under a fake identity. They launched an investigation, but couldn't guarantee immediate results. The final day of the summit arrived. Amani and Miriam emerged from the closing ceremony, the thunderous applause of delegates still echoing in their ears. They walked outside, onto the terrace, overlooking Lake Geneva. A crisp breeze rustled the waters, and the snow-capped peaks framed the city in serene majesty, a perfect backdrop for photos and final goodbyes. In the next hour, delegates would scatter across the globe. Amani and Miriam planned to fly back to New York together the following day, then head to their respective home bases. A photographer snapped a shot of them with a small group of colleagues. They exchanged handshakes and business cards with new contacts, discussing future collaborations. Amid the bustle, Amani felt her phone buzz. Another call from Linda Liu. She stepped aside. "Linda?" "Dr. Wright, I have some updates on the investigation. We've gathered sufficient evidence to conclude that Captain McAllister violated our airline's non-discrimination policy." Amani's shoulders sagged in relief. "That's good to hear. The committee will be recommending disciplinary action, which could include termination," Linda continued. "However, the union is pushing back. There may be negotiations for a lesser penalty, perhaps a suspension." Amani's relief soured. So, despite all the evidence, he might just get a slap on the wrist. "It depends on how the negotiations go," Linda admitted, "but your complaint is fully substantiated. We want you to know that. There's also a possibility of a public apology or restitution. Would you be open to a settlement?" Amani's mind whirled. "I need to consider the ramifications. My main aim is to ensure accountability, not necessarily to ruin anyone's life. But if he's dangerous or unrepentant, people need to be protected." Linda acknowledged that. "We'll keep you informed. If it goes to arbitration, you may be called to testify." After she hung up, Amani stared out over the lake, her reflection in the water's surface, a portrait of fatigue and resolve. Miriam approached with concern. "What is it?" Amani relayed Linda's call. Miriam shook her head. "Typical. They always try to protect their own, but at least they found him at fault." "Yes," Amani agreed, though her voice held an edge of bitterness. "But it doesn't feel like justice yet." She and Miriam lingered by the lake, watching gulls wheel across the sky. Then they headed back inside to finish their goodbyes, exchange final documents, and confirm travel arrangements. By dinner time, the palais was nearly empty. Geneva's streets beckoned them with lamplit charm. They dined at a small restaurant near the hotel, enjoying fondue and reminiscing about the success of the summit. Later that night, Amani sat in her hotel room, reflecting on the entire trip, the triumph of the conference overshadowed by one pilot's malice. The next day, she and Miriam would board a flight to New York. She checked her phone again, no new messages from the unknown number. Perhaps the harasser had decided to back off, especially now that the airline was taking official action. Yet, as she drifted to sleep, a subtle unease lingered. Karma hadn't fully played out. She suspected more was on the horizon. Often, the hardest fall comes when one believes they've avoided consequences. Amani and Miriam arrived at Geneva Airport the next morning, relieved to be heading home. They checked in without issue and made their way to the gate. As they waited to board, Amani's stomach twisted. Captain McAllister stood nearby, dressed in plain clothes, glaring at her. His presence felt menacing, but she tried to ignore him. Once on the plane, they heard raised voices at the entrance. Uniformed Swiss security appeared with an airline representative and McAllister behind them, pointing in Amani's direction. He accused her of sending threatening messages that cost him his job. Stunned passengers watched as security requested Amani step off the aircraft to clarify the situation. In the jet bridge, she calmly showed the officer the harassing text she'd received and explained her formal complaint. The airline representative backed her, confirming the internal investigation's conclusion that McAllister had violated policy. Finding no evidence to support his claims, the officer told McAllister to leave. Red-faced and furious, he stormed away. A shaken Amani and Miriam reboarded amid whispered speculation. But the doors soon closed and the plane lifted off for New York. Though the encounter left Amani rattled, it only reinforced that the pilot's attempt to escape accountability or intimidate her into silence had finally imploded in public. The path to justice was clearer than ever. Amani's flight touched down at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York late that evening. Exhausted but relieved, she and Miriam stepped off the plane. Waiting in the arrivals hall was a small group of unassociates who had heard about the airport altercation in Geneva. They welcomed her with concern and support, offering to assist with any legal follow-up. Over the next few days, the airline concluded its investigation. Based on the flight attendant's statements, Amani's account, and Captain McAllister's own unprofessional behavior in Geneva, they decided on termination. The pilot union contested, but the evidence was overwhelming. The final blow was McAllister's attempt to falsely accuse Amani in Geneva, a stunt that backfired catastrophically, strengthening the airline's case that he posed a liability. A letter arrived at Amani's office, formally apologizing for the ordeal. The airline's CEO extended a personal note, emphasizing that they did not condone discrimination in any form and expressing regret for how she was treated. They offered a courtesy travel voucher, though Amani wasn't sure she'd ever want to fly with them again. Meanwhile, the Swiss police contacted her with an update. They'd confirmed the burner phone used to send the threatening messages was purchased with a credit card under a friend's name connected to McAllister. Though the friend denied involvement, the connection cast further suspicion on McAllister. Formal charges might follow, depending on how the friend's testimony unfolded. Amani left the matter in the hands of law enforcement, trusting justice would be served. Back at the Amani dove into post-conference follow-ups, championing the pilot project for climate-smart infrastructure. She found a renewed vigor, fueled by the satisfaction of standing up for herself and winning. Her colleagues rallied around her, praising her for her resilience. One afternoon, a final note arrived in her email, a scanned letter from Captain McAllister, penned with shaky handwriting. The text read, "Doctor, right, I lost my job, my reputation, and maybe my future because of this. I let my anger get the best of me. I still believe you misunderstood my intentions, but clearly I crossed a line. I've been advised to apologize. If it means anything, I'm sorry, Robert McAllister." Amani stared at the words, feeling a swirl of emotions. A forced apology was better than none, but it reeked of bitterness. She closed the email without responding. Some lessons are learned the hard way. The threads of fate often weave justice in unexpected ways. By confronting prejudice head-on, Amani Wright not only defended her dignity but also shone a global spotlight on how casual bias can erupt into life-altering conflict. The pilot who questioned her English had hoped to mask his discrimination behind the veil of safety, but karma arrived with swift clarity, lost job, shattered reputation, and an unconvincing apology. Meanwhile, Amani emerged stronger, her voice resonating on the global stage as a testament to resilience. Let her story stand as a reminder that prejudice no matter how insidiously cloaked, can and must be challenged, and that even in a world as vast as ours, justice finds its way. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up, share it with friends, and subscribe to the channel. Every click helps spread the message that each of us has the power to stand up to discrimination and emerge victorious. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more compelling stories.